incredible.
The shaming of the world's largest podcaster continues because he dared to have controversial voices on his talk show. Interestingly, the people doing the shaming are all the people who are far more influential now because Joe Rogan had them on when their views were controversial themselves. Also, the Pentagon has fired 3 of their best and brightest for dubious reasons. We got some progress on the Eastern Front, but it's being scuttled by a comedian pretending to be president of Ukraine. And the movement of the universal school choice programs has gotten 4 states on this year, and we're going to do a quick update on that. A lot to cover today. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great, Dave. And I think it's ironic that a comedian is running a country as if he has any expertise in the matter.
Exactly.
I just think that's really bizarre. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics. We are so glad to have you join us. While we're here, before we get started, please, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button. We'd love it if you would engage with us in the comments. Our last episode on the Douglas Murray-Dave Smith debate did super great, and we got a lot of great conversation going on. So please jump in and do that. And if you're watching on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do leave us a review and make sure you follow us everywhere. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. David, let's get into it.
Yeah, and just to echo that real quick, the best thing you could do from our experience so far on being on YouTube is just put a comment in there. Like, just do in there and just say, David, you need to shave your head. You're a little bit off, or whatever. Just say something, anything, literally. It's the best way to promote us and get us some more viewers.
As one of our commenters on the last episode said, rap sucks. Not entirely sure the context there. Maybe it's about the intro music. If it's about the intro music, actually, yeah, leave us a comment. Let us know, what do you think of our intro music? Is it good? Is it not good? I think it's amazing. It's produced by a friend of the show, a great musician out of Nashville, Dave Moran. He's a killer songwriter and producer. And so if you don't like it, then I think you suck.
Yeah,
but leave us a comment and let us know.
All right. So we got Joe Rogan had Jordan Peterson on, and we kind of got into like a Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray round 3. Now, you've probably seen our analysis of the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray debate and the stuff that kind of happened afterwards. Interestingly, Joe had another comedian on. I'm spacing his name right now. The bigger guy. What's his name?
Tim Dillon
on, and they actually mocked the "Have you been" thing, and that was really funny. Exactly. So next up was Jordan Peterson to come back on and talk, and he got another finger wagging. Now, to kind of not bury the lead too much, I do think that Jordan Peterson has interesting insights into this space that I think are worthy of dialogue. And I think some of the folks online are being a little bit too like, you're on the wrong side of this sort of thing with Jordan Peterson. But I do think there is important applications that he is missing that I think is very important to what we're talking about when it comes to Israel versus Palestine and how to navigate the idea of what to do about political extremism. So to get us started, here's the first section where he kind of introduces the concern.
I think that virtualization has enabled the psychopaths.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, well,
without a doubt.
That's a terrible thing because the psychopathic types, they're always the death of everything. Like I'm seeing this come up on the right now. So imagine this. I've been working on a new theory of political psychopathology, and I like it quite a lot.
Is this where the term the woke right comes in?
Yeah. Well, Lindsay is pointing at that, but he hasn't got the diagnosis exactly right. So it isn't woke. That's not the issue. It's not exactly.
He's one level. They're talking about is like similar types of behavior.
He is talking about that. Yeah, no. What he's pointing.
Woke just lets you clarify in your head. Oh, it's like that.
Yeah, but the problem is
it's like Antifa.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that argument is predicated on the claim that the ideas are the problem, like the woke ideas, for example, on the right or the left. But that's not the problem. The problem is that 4 to 5% of the population, something like that, is cluster B, that's the DSM-5 terms, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic, or they have dark tetrad traits, they're Machiavellian, they're sadistic. That's about 4%. Okay, so the question is, how do these people maneuver? And the answer is they go to where the power is, and they adopt those ideas and they put themselves even on the forefront of that.
Right.
But the ideas are completely irrelevant.
Right.
All they're doing is they're the Pharisees. They're the modern version of the Pharisees. They're the people who use God's name in vain, right? As they proclaim moral virtue.
Yes.
Doesn't matter whether it's right or left or Christian or Jewish or Islam. They invade the idea space and then they use those ideas as false weapons to advance their narcissistic advantage.
Yes.
And so then you have the problem, and the right's going to face this more and more, particularly because the left had to face it when they were in power.
Yes.
How do you identify the psychopathic parasites, 4% of the population, who are clothed in your clothing and waving your flags, but who are only in it for narcissistic benefit?
Well, that's interesting to me. So full disclosure, I haven't been able to watch this episode yet. It just came out today as of the recording of this show. But it sounds to me first like he's describing the entire political class in the United States. But my question for you, David, is he accusing Dave Smith of being narcissistic?
No, he's actually, I'm not sure. I think this has more to do with the another section of the Douglas Murray debate. I think people are kind of drawing this connection on X, and I'm not sure if that's a fair connection with this particular clip. There's another section we'll get into, a section where I think he's much more fair towards all three parties, Murray, Smith, and Rogan. And the overall tone is him contending with this problem of what to do about, that proportion of the population. And we'll get into some application and specifically the carbon space and like climate change and stuff like that, where I think he's making the case and it's sensible. The question is how to apply it given the Israel-Palestine situation. And I don't know what it is. I think it's at least part of that clip, meaning it's like some attack on Dave Smith, as it's kind of been portrayed online, is just the fact that he works for the Daily Wire and has had some foreign policy views that are really close to, Ben Shapiro and the other people at the Daily Wire, right? Maybe with the exception of that one guy that asks who women are or whatever.
Matt Walsh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't remember these people's names.
The beard. I don't know.
Up here, guys. Yeah,
the guy with the beard.
I don't know. You know what I'm talking about. That was a good show. Anyway, I'm just saying, people are kind of drawing that line, and maybe it's fair, maybe it's not. And that's where I think the getting into his criteria is worth doing, right? Of what we're talking about when we're saying what to do with that. Now, that wasn't the shame part. So I think we have to do the shame part. But before we do that, let's get into who fits this definition.
That's my next question is, if not Dave Smith, who is he describing in this case?
I think he's describing this guy, right? No. Well, I got to switch over the screen here for you, Joe. This guy. I thought you were going to run the screen. All right. So the Misfit Patriot. Now, this guy, I don't know why. I don't follow him. I think it's maybe because people I follow comment on his stuff or whatever. But he keeps on getting into my feed. It drives me crazy. So the top of this is, I'm okay with as many dead kids as it takes to stop Hamas. Now, that's the top of the tweet. Does it matter anything else below the tweet? Excellent question. But notice he even touches on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just reading the in between. You people sound like woke leftists trying to make an emotional argument so you can argue from a position of moral superiority. You might as well put a rainbow flag and pronouns in your bio. If you try to emotionally blackmail me, I will pull your effing card. Literally every single Palestinian can die if that's what it takes to save Israel. How many kids were in Sodom and Gomorrah? God didn't have a F word about how many, because the people who were righteous was zero. What about the firstborn children of Egypt? How many children died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? All of them. That's my acceptable cost. Palestinians raped and murdered 1,200 people, innocent people, took American hostages, F them and their whole bloodline. You effing pussies, don't get F about the tragedy. Why is this guy getting so big? I mean, I can't cuss on YouTube, but he can get big with all of this stuff. So anyways, I think that guy is the narcissist, right? That guy fits far more so, clothing himself in his righteousness as he, does his thing. Or here's another. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I would just say, I mean, I guess it depends on what you would say he's clothing himself in culturally, because Jordan Peterson's point seemed to be that these voices have ulterior motives that are self-centered.
Yeah.
And they're wrapping themselves in the narratives that you agree with. I don't agree with that narrative even slightly. So to me, that doesn't fit that definition.
I think he's fitting into the Israeli narrative, right? He's taking a radical position for views and clout to be the most radical on that side, right? It's like he's the guy throwing the paint at the Mona Lisa to raise awareness by saying something shocking about how bad Hamas is and how, I guess, God doesn't care about the death of children. But it's the radicalness of it that is repulsive to Jordan Peterson when it comes to these other issues. Why wouldn't it be the radicalness here?
Right. I get your point now that this is happening on the side that Jordan Peterson ostensibly agrees with, and yet he's not necessarily calling this out the same way he's calling it out if it's a Free Palestine protest.
Right. Exactly. So I guess I got another one here for you, which is this interesting rant from Roseanne Barr. And I'm not picking on Roseanne because, she's not a geopolitical commentator, but she is engaging in this space. And I think I don't know, she seems a little wine drunk here, so maybe it's not fair. But I think this gives you insight into the way people are reacting to cause the atmosphere of the, everything that criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic.
That I want to talk to you about specifically, because I think you and I might.
You can say all the shit you want about Israel, girl. You can say that they did this, in your opinion, they're doing that, and you don't feel it's right. But Christ is King. That's where you went over the line, girl. That's where you crossed the Rubicon. You went beyond the pale, because that's about Jews, not Israel. Okay, get it?
Can you explain this?
I didn't dig it.
What does this mean?
Because Jews, not Israel, the Jews.
But what I'm saying is, when I saw the Christ is King,
and then she goes out there and goes, you can't even criticize Israel. No, but you didn't do that, Candace. You went on the Jews, the Jewish religion. You crossed the Jewish religion, the Jewish Torah, the Jewish belief system. You went deep and you didn't need to. And that was a sin. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have cut tie with source. Well, Jesus was the source of that, and he was with that. You shouldn't have insulted that source, Candace, and you need to repent for that. And that's your slap to get your rewiring straight if you want to stay on the side of Hashem and Torah, because that's what we're living in, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Candace.
But how is that? How is what you're saying? And I'm just playing devil's advocate and doing a good producing job here. How is you saying this is you live in the Torah, Candace? How is that different than her saying Christ is King? Because she's saying her religion, this is our tenet, and you're saying this is our tenet of our religion, and you're both claiming that each one of your sides is right. Meanwhile, you're saying she's anti-Semitic, but I could make the claim that would be anti-Christian of you. I'm not saying this. I'm just saying I could make the claim for you to say we live in Torah, that denies the New Testament. Isn't that the same exact thing? You know what I mean?
It's a checkmate for sure.
Okay.
But she shouldn't have went there. And so, yeah, I did step up and checkmate her for sure. But you shouldn't have done it.
Why?
Because you didn't need to. Because there was peace there, and you didn't need to take it over the Rubicon to beyond the pale. You didn't need to do that.
So I think that's like the distillation of like the emotional response of what, some people in the Jewish community are feeling when Candace is saying Christ is King. Now, remember, Jordan Peterson put out the whole thing this Lent cycle, mentioning how Christ is King is like this bell ringing of anti-Semitism of sorts. And of course, the response was, well, but it's Lent, and when this came around last time, it's also a declaration of faith for a lot of Christians, and a lot of people saying, no, actually, we're not just any religion, we're this religion that believes this thing. So my point being is that this like clothing in terms of like the narcissistic behavior of making it actually an attack on your religion, an attack about the way you see the world, rather than actually taking it on their terms. That's the thing that a radical does. That's the narcissism, right? That's the thing that I can't see the way you see the world. I only see the world in terms of the way I see the world. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah. So, and one more. Let's get into what Candace actually thinks.
We agree on this. We're way past that. So that's not even a question anymore. There had to have been a response. And you are correct that no matter what, the response would have been criticized. But now there are questions about whether or not, like I said, they allowed this attack to happen. And I think this corruption trial will tell us much more. My instincts are telling me yes. But to go back to your question about whether or not social media can color you the wrong way, for the first time ever, we were just able to see what was happening in Palestine. Before, we just had to rely on legacy media who has to...
But did you believe all you were seeing?
When I first saw it, I kind of wanted to wait. You know, I was trying to just sort through everything.
Because I'm still not sure all the stuff I see is right.
Well,
it's very
some
hard
of it,
to...
well, but I'm now getting my information because I ended up signing up for Haaretz in Israeli newspapers because they're protesting it. They're calling this an ethnic
No, I
cleansing.
read that stuff all the time, yeah.
If Israeli newspapers are calling this an ethnic cleansing, why do we not have people in the Western media that have the courage to call it the same? It's clearly not anti-Semitism. Why on earth would Haaretz media or a Haaretz Israeli newspaper be anti-Semitic and want to see the undoing of Jews? Again, this goes back to AIPAC and back to lobbying. But to answer your question, that piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't believe that essentially everything that I had these presets to believe about Jews, everything was existential. Again, that sort of Holocaust upbringing in my mind culturally, seeing so many Holocaust movies, I kind of had these factory settings where I instantly always wanted to see Jewish people as the victim. And it was very hard for me to kind of shed that and to...
But a lot of Jewish people were victims here too.
Correct. But what I'm saying is my factory...
So it's not wrong for them to play the victim if they're genuinely being victims.
If they're genuinely being victims, correct. But when I say my factory settings, what I mean is that the second a Jewish person got hysterical about anything, I just assumed they were telling the truth and were the victims. I'm just kind of going back and assessing my own character flaws. I got this wrong in my political career. What you should do is not have these factory settings and actually examine the facts, right? And so when
Now, does that seem like a narcissist? Does that seem like somebody who's engaging in this to get close to power so that they can exercise dominion over other people's lives?
Not exactly. It actually kind of goes back to the point we were making last week about the pride versus humility spectrum. I mean, she did just admit that she had some views that she now doesn't agree with, that, you know, she was wrong about. She admitted she was wrong. So to me, that says the exact opposite of that personally.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, okay, so where's Jordan going with this? Like, how is he actually going to contend with this engagement? Because a lot of the podcast is about his views on what to do about that. So let's dive into that more specifically. Here's the section where it actually hits on the Murray versus Smith debate. I know we're doing a lot of reaction here, guys, but bear with us.
Hey, it's the name of the show. That's what we do.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, all these complex things are multidimensional. I mean, I watched your whole conversation with Douglas, and I thought you guys did a very credible job, all three of you, of navigating unbelievably choppy waters. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, because one of the things I was trying to figure out when I was watching that is, do I think I could have done a better job of any of you? And I certainly didn't walk away from it with that idea in mind. But then underneath all that, I thought there's a really unbelievably tricky problem here. And I think that's why it's made it poked up into, well, you also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation. And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now, and then make a barrier, right? Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades,
Right.
and they didn't, and they couldn't. And the left is not good at drawing barriers, partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for their own gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guise. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well,
but
particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you've let your curiosity guide you your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like,
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
how do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah. Because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then you have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out in the Daily Wire side of things too. Not to say that that's exactly the same situation. It's like, once you gain in reach and authority, then how do you know that? How do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture? Yeah, that's right. That hasn't got the proper aims.
So that's the core of it, right? Why aren't you, how do you navigate when you should self-censor in the selection of the people you have on your show, Joe?
Well, that's a really good question.
Well, okay, wait a minute. Who has he had on the show that is empowering these people that he's talking about, right? These narcissistic, power-hungry Pharisee figures who are in the cloak of righteousness using arguments to elicit people from the edge of the conservative spectrum to take over the conservatives or to influence the conservative movement. I'm not
Nobody
sure
I can think of.
Yeah, like, what are we talking about here? He hasn't had Nick Fuentes on, right? Right? I mean, he didn't have Ye on. Who's he talking about? So this is the weird, like, I can't, and just like Douglas Murray, he's not actually addressing anything, of just like talking around it, of like trying to sound like the legacy media and encourage a legacy media approach to thinking about speech and ideas without actually just coming out and saying it. Yeah, well, and it's really disappointing to hear from Jordan Peterson, somebody whom I have looked up to for a lot of different reasons, not particularly his foreign policy views, but also as somebody himself who made a career saying controversial things on the internet and advocating for not censoring that, advocating for being able to say what you need to say in the public square. I mean, and for him to just turn, particularly for him, I don't so much, I don't have as strong a feeling about Douglas Murray, because I don't view him the same way as I view Jordan Peterson, as having an impact on my life personally. But it's just really disappointing and disingenuous for this issue to then all of a sudden crumble all of the principles that I thought he held regarding free speech. Yeah. And to me, that's the solution here, is how do you deal with it? How do you come up with a framework? Well, you have to air out all the ideas. The bad ones will be rebutted, and they will be shot down, and they will be worked out. And maybe if you do it well enough, you can convince the people who are holding the views you so disagree with that they will change their minds. Right. But if you shove them off into the corner of the internet, into the dark web, or whatever corner of Twitter they're festering in, then it's just going to continue to get worse, in my view. Well, it's this consequentialist approach, right? Is if you say the wrong thing, then people might believe the wrong thing, and then we'll have a bad social order, that we need to have an ordered social order so people believe the right things. And now you're kind of like gatekeeping, you're like closing the door on what you think the right social order is. So you're doing the same thing that they said when he came out and said, hey, I don't believe in compelled speech. And they said, you're trying to genocide trans people. Right. He's doing the same thing. Right. Because their argument was, if people hear that, if people are mean, then it might wind up in a genocide. Right. And like that catastrophism is, of course, it embodies exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about the fringe elements who are narcissistic and sociopathic and all those kinds of things. So, like, how are you navigating this? You're navigating it the way that the people who tried to shut you up navigated it. And I struggle to see how you could. He's like, you need to have order and not too much order, not too much chaos. Okay, he's got like this Taoist opinion of those things. I get that, but yeah, that means you got to have some chaos. You got to have some disagreement. You got to have some voices who are untasty. He hasn't had Dan Blazarian on to talk about his views. That guy is way further out than a lot of these other people on specifically anti-Semitism. You haven't had Jake Shields or any of those people who are legitimate, like believe in a Jewish conspiracy that controls the world kind of people. Right. But what should you do with those people? Well, I mean, okay, if Joe hasn't had them on, why are you blaming him for like edge movements on the internet? And then like Dave Smith isn't doing that. Obviously, he's a Jewish guy. What are we talking about here?
To me, what it feels like, and perhaps what it feels like to other people who are observing this debate going on right now, is that they're trying to tie very legitimate criticisms of the way Israel is handling this conflict in Gaza to these extreme elements to disempower it, to make it seem illegitimate. The same thing that they did to the anti-war movement with MK Ultra in during the Vietnam War. Right? Like create, these radical elements, tie the whole movement to them to discredit them and get them out of the way so that you can proceed with your plan. That's just what it feels like to me.
Yeah. You mean Operation Chaos. Yeah. But encouraging the hippie movement, encouraging the LSD and the drug thing, and then using that to discredit anti-war. I think that's it's a similar tactic, right? You tie them to something distasteful and then you use that to attack. That's obviously a tactic that they might be using. And it almost seems like it's hard to say that they're not, because they're not talking about the issue. They're not coming to the table to actually debate it. Douglas Murray did. And then how do you get the view after watching the Douglas Murray debate with Dave Smith that they all contended so well with the issue? Like, how do you get there? Like, that's an insane take. I just can't believe that Douglas Murray did a great job navigating choppy water. All he did was attack Dave Smith's character and pretend like he was doing something he wasn't doing, which is, I'm just a comedian, don't take me seriously thing. I mean, come on, like, make an argument, like, bring your case. That's not contending with choppy water. That's avoiding the choppy water in order to character assassinate the opposition. Come on.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were a couple of points where Douglas Murray in his debate with Dave Smith actually did address the issues. I mean, when they talked about the way that forces have to, work around buildings where there might be militants. I don't necessarily agree with the prescription, but just like actually engaging with the issue, it did happen a couple of times, but the vast majority of it, 95% of it, was him basically just saying Dave is unqualified to speak on these issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And even when you had that, he didn't want to go that far, right? Or he completely changed the topic anytime it got to anything of substance. Right. Yeah. Talking about when do we actually trade a life? How do we navigate that? One, because it's a good tactic to avoid that, because kind of people like that first X post that we showed find that very distasteful.
Yeah. I don't think that having that guy attached to their movement and their arguments is very good for legitimizing their perspective in the eyes of the people who are honestly trying to engage in this issue, maybe don't have a very firm opinion on it one way or another. Seeing that is, I would say, as off-putting as somebody who's extremely anti-Semitic on the other side of the issue.
Exactly. And so that begs the ultimate question: is who is the people who are actually doing this? Who is going in to cultivate power to shame someone else into silence? Who are the people right now who have power and are using it to silence people? Well, the administration is, right? We have the Stop Anti-Semitism law, which didn't pass the Senate, but did pass the House. Who are the people who are trying to wield power in order to stifle speech right now? Who are the people who are deporting people with visas, legitimate lawful residents, for speech? right? And you can get even though I think those people are wrong, leave aside whether or not the First Amendment applies to them. They're wrong about that when they say it doesn't, but leave that aside. You're still the ones who are exercising power in order to stifle things.
Yeah.
So
very clearly.
Yes.
And then sticking their mouthpieces on Joe Rogan for platforming people with opinions they don't like.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My question is, will it work? Do you think it'll work? Do you think Joe Rogan will balk at the next opportunity to have Dave Smith on his show?
No, I don't think so. And I do recommend people watch the actual Jordan Peterson interview. They get some really great places with the interview. And I still like Jordan Peterson on many levels on when he's talking about psychology, philosophy, things like that. I'm endlessly interested in the way that he thinks about the Western canon. But it's Joe does an amazing job jujitsuing Jordan out of trying to shame him the entire time. He just flips it on him and just drives it a different direction. At one point, obviously he gets into is that the woke right in that first clip that we went over? That's the only time he kind of drives that direction. And then he spends the rest of the time diverting him off and talking about how we unpack this when it comes to other elements for social order, which I do think are important. And I was going to go into the carbon one. We're actually going to skip that because we're running a little long on this story. But I think this moment is, and people are calling it the podcast war. I think this moment is super important because basically what we're saying is the debate is, do we become the legacy press where we spend our time in the new media space shaming each other for our editorial decisions as opposed to engaging with ideas, right? And because ideas are the thing that actually are the commodity here. It's what ideas you bring to the table. And we have such an opportunity, and this is ultimately why I think it doesn't work out in the pro-censorship favor, is the abundance of information is repellent to that. Just like we're talking about how Candace actually mentioned in a very similar way. If you are at all online and you spend some time actually looking at the idea, the issues of Israel-Palestine, not simply from a religious perspective, and I mean that in the broadest sense possible, in the statist religious perspective, in the Christian or Jewish or whatever, but in the, I need to know what's happening and what the actual story is here so I can understand whether or not I'm on the right side of it, right? And you see these torn up bodies. Just this week in the Israel-Palestine issue, the Israeli government admitted and actually fired one guy for Israeli forces firing on and killing 11 medical workers who were responding to some injured people. They claimed that 40%, weird number, but 40% were Hamas. They presented no evidence, but they said the commander who authorized that attack should not have done so, because he buried the bodies and the ambulance and all the material. And then we actually found that, well, not we, but a reporter found a cell phone footage of one of the people who were shot. And you watch that and you say, oh, what are we doing here? What is going on here? Contending with the reality of war, with that hell that is war. And then saying, given all that abundance of information, I don't see how you can stop that with finger wagging about what is your responsibility for people who might take the words of people that you're bringing on wrong and start to believe something that I don't think they should believe. It just doesn't work. It's a bad play. No.
It is. Yeah. And I think you're right. I don't think that it works out well in their favor in the long run.
Mm-hmm. All right. So next up, 3 Pentagon staffers accused of leaking and fired. And unfortunately, they all happen to be the good guys. So basically what happened is kind of the background here that I think is a little bit missed is, and this isn't as apparent as it was when everyone was on cable news, because a lot of this is happening kind of on Hill articles and on X. This pressure to attack Iran, as argued by the Hawks, is that Iran is currently militarily degraded for all kinds of reasons. And, now is the time to attack. So there's this outside pressure happening on the administration to make that happen. And of course, as we discussed last week, there's a lot of internal dialogue about that as well. We reported last week that the New York Times revealed that Trump had refused to back Israel's plan for a May offensive based on leak reporting. And I do want to know this one more time because I think it's really freaking important, and it seems like everyone's missing it. That plan included ground operations, boots on the ground. Not American boots, but Israeli commando boots. And the likelihood of that escalating, as was predicted by Tulsi, seems obvious to me, not as a military expert, but just as somebody who's been around for the last 25 years, looking at foreign policy and saying, what are we doing? That this could escalate out of favor. So what happened on this story is late last week, Dan Caldwell, who I worked with at CVA AFP, was suspended. He walked out of the Pentagon and then was fired. He was accused of having leaked government secrets to the press, and he was along with two others. One of whom was Darren Selnick, another guy I know, I worked with a little bit, who isn't even a foreign policy guy. Darren Selnick?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did a project with CVA, and we spent a couple of days together shooting a project. Yeah.
Very cool.
That's really sad to hear.
Yeah, so he was working also on the operations side. Now, the kind of throughput line here is these are all people who are, Caldwell claims he's innocent. They all claim they're innocent, and not given a chance to defend himself against these charges. Never had his phone inspected, nor did he ever have a polygraph test. He did a great interview with Tucker Carlson. Definitely check it out. So the core cause here in the shorthand is that Caldwell claims that they were shaking up the culture at the DOD. Right. So Selnick was doing that on operations. Another guy, I forget his name right now, was doing that on acquisitions, meaning the purchasing of the DOD. Right. So one guy is getting woke out, right, hitting the cultural stuff. Dan Caldwell is a realist, meaning he's a skeptic of interventionism. He's not a non-interventionist like me. He is closer to that side, or closer to us than he is the neocons. Right. So he is outed. And Tucker, guesses that this is probably because of his anti-Iran stance, given the pressure happening from outside the administration and the decision not to go with the May offensive. And then obviously you have the acquisitions guy, right? He's the guy who's actually in charge of budgets at the DOD, and he is the one who's in charge of the $1,000 ice cream scoop phenomena that we see with DOD budgets, as well as, the inability to account for anything or pass an audit. That's the guy that they got rid of. Yeah.
Very convenient for the deep state.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's too coincidental, the timing, everything else. Now, they're kind of intimating online and in other places that from the opposition is saying, well, this has to do with that New York Times report that was so embarrassing of the administration, saying no to Israel. But that motive makes no sense. Why, if you won, would you release the information to the New York Times? I mean, what has come out that's embarrassing for that would help Dan Caldwell fight the neocons? Like, what information has been released to the press? Unless the story is still being written, but we don't have any evidence of that. So what's going on here where they think that there was a leak that apparently never resulted in any public knowledge that was embarrassing to the neocons beyond this? Especially if the decision went your way. The last thing you want to do is risk your entire career for a decision that went your way. Think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes no sense. So obviously that's not the reason why they were fired. Is there any recourse for them in this issue?
I mean, there's always the public pressure campaign to say this and then they get rehired. I would really like to see that with all three. But, Dan, in the end of the interview, he kind of says, hey, look, I'm fine being on the outside anyways. I'll do the work out here. Doesn't really know if he wants to go back, which I understand, because I can't imagine being fired by a guy that you worked for 10 years and then, and you're in this position and it's embarrassing. You have these articles written about you on this thing. And especially after, apparently if Hegseth is believing the account of someone else in the organization over his guy that helped him with the acquisitions of everybody else in the administration in the DOD that was there from the very beginning on VA Choice and Realism and Restraint. That's been advocating for the Trumpian position from outside the system this entire time and building the ideological case against interventionism and the neocons. Like, what? So I wouldn't, obviously he's very we need Pete Hegseth and he needs to be a good Secretary of Defense in the interview, but I couldn't imagine the sense of betrayal that you would feel after that.
It almost makes you feel like perhaps there was a desire that heads needed to roll to at least maybe take some of the heat off of the situation. And he was almost like a sacrificial lamb in this sense to be let go. Who knows? Maybe there was a conversation had and it wasn't a blindside that like, hey, we need to somehow take the fire down just a little bit. So we're going to shake things up just a little bit here. And you're going to be one of the guys that are unfortunately on the losing end of that, but it's for the greater cause. Do you think is there any precedent for that being the situation?
Possible. No, I don't know. But you have to ask, like, why? What we're talking about here is an enormously consequential war. There's going to be heat. Deal with it. You're a grown ass man in the most important job, in one of the most important jobs in America, running the largest organization in the world with the most amount of people and ability to destroy the planet. Like, this is up to you, bro. You got to figure this out. And how could you get rid of one of your best assets for making that case?
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. Maybe it's always possible. Maybe Dan and these guys all went to him and said, hey, we want out. How can we best serve getting out? Well, make us martyrs. But I don't see that happening. In fact, other than Tucker Carlson's interview, which is substantial and it's gotten quite a few views, like 200,000, something like that. It's not a 4 million person view interview, right? And I'm still seeing a lot of people like using this as an opportunity to, bridge into the neoconservative view and claim that, the whole America First thing is a fraud. So I don't know. But,
how so?
Well, I don't think it's a good case, but they're online saying, well, this guy he should not be taken seriously. After all, he betrayed the country and he released information to the press that, they're claiming he betrayed Hegseth, right? They're saying he isn't loyal. He isn't loyal to his country. He didn't follow his oath. And look, I would hate it if people believe that I took an oath and then didn't follow it. That would be a terrible feeling. For sure. Much less the whole country thinking that. So I don't know. Maybe, but I think the cost is high. But, at least one of the points here, too, is like, this is an enormously important issue that they have to win on. Like, America First has to win on it. We're talking thousands of American lives. The specter of homegrown terrorism as a response here in America, because we know that that is the collateral consequences of war. Terrorism, period. That's what it is. Sorry, but that's what it is. Hundreds of millions to hundreds of millions to billions of dollars is a response. To spend to make that whole thing happen depends on how far you think this thing escalates. Once shot's fired, you don't know how far that's going to go. And then, it could be 6 hours of warfare in the stupid, mission accomplished Bush vision of how to do regime change, because we know that's what's actually going on. And there was some interesting stuff in here about how the sleight of hand, the Mott and Bailey that is being conducted by the Hawks, where they say the Mott is, we're gonna go in for nukes, but it's really about regime change, and they'll actually kind of signal that, unfortunately. And then I thought there was one clip here from Tucker Carlson about the real domestic cost. If all the foreign policy cost is like, that's foreign policy mumbo jumbo, just think about the domestic cost and what it means for the right, for a war with Iran and what it really means.
Seems like fastest way to derail the whole project, the Trump administration and the United States of America, is a war with Iran. And that's why I've just been watching it as carefully as I can, because I feel like, again, if you hated Donald Trump and you hated what the administration is doing on immigration, trade, anti-wokeness, whatever, and you wanted to stop it, the first thing you would do is apply pressure to have the U.S. military engage in a war with Iran. I mean, that's my perspective on it anyway.
I think that, and also continuing to do what we've been doing previously in Russia, Ukraine.
For sure.
So, the best way to get war with Iran is to get the people out of the administration or around the administration that are your buttresses against that, right? And put your people in. So that's Tucker, and I think Tucker's right about this. I think that's the real cause here. The underlying cost.
Interesting. So do we have any insight yet? I mean, I suppose we certainly don't, since this is so new, but who these guys will be replaced with? I assume Hegseth will have some control or the control over who gets hired in their place.
Yeah, I think some of these like people underneath them are in that role now until someone new can be hired unless they're going to stay. But I haven't seen reporting on that yet, so we'll see. I mean, it depends on if Hegseth continues the path, right? I mean, and is willing to continue, backing America first, or if he's being slow walked into a different position, which we've seen people do before.
Yeah, I suppose that will say a lot about where he currently stands as to, who gets hired here will really tell us a lot about where he currently is.
Yep. 100%. So we do have on the Eastern Front, as I said up front, on Ukraine, some progress there that I did want to report because it is somewhat a good thing and somewhat frustrating. So in the last few weeks, things have been moving very slowly on Russia, Ukraine, and ending that. Russia might be, and I've theorized this. I haven't said it on the podcast, but in my own time, that Russia might be trying to slow walk this because ultimately time is on their side. The longer they can delay, the more territory they can take. If they can frustrate the Americans in this position, based upon his claims that it's going to end it in 24 hours, you might find yourself into a better bargaining position. It's a risky game to play with Donald Trump, but there it is. In fact, to the point where just 2 weeks ago, Marco Rubio threatened to prioritize other diplomatic issues unless the Russians started coming to the table. Well, that did happen. And we got this story out of the Wall Street Journal, which I thought was interesting. Russia welcomes U.S. proposal to deny NATO membership to Ukraine. This approach of, leading with like the key features of what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Russia-Ukraine, and we have, the U.S., pitched the ball to Ukraine to kind of draft this deal. As part of the U.S. Russia engagement, they need Ukraine on board to some degree. And they offer as one of these things that Ukraine won't ever join NATO. Now, remembering that NATO expansion is a key part of the war, a key part of the cause. Another part of this is that Russia wants to keep its gained territories, of course. That's, part of what wars of conquest are about, in order to deter and give a buffer to themselves for any future invasion from their west. Putin has claimed other Ukrainian regions like Kherson, Zaporizhia, I always say that one wrong, Donetsk and Luhansk. They believe in that they're now part of Russia. Noting that only Luhansk region is fully under Russian control. The other ones have parts of those territories under control. But the deal as it currently is that the U.S. has only promised so far as part of the deal making to recognize officially Crimea. Remember, Crimea was brought into the Russian Confederation in 2014, right? So we've never acknowledged the coup de main that happened. This wasn't part of the Ukraine war. This has nothing to do with the Ukraine war, really. Basically, what that entire taking of Crimea was, there's a military base, and they went outside, and they said, this is our now. And there was like a gunfight, one guy died, and that's it. It's sad. Yeah. One guy died. But, this is a relatively bloodless taking of an area that is very ethnically Russian, that then later voted to join the Russian Federation officially. Now, maybe that was a rigged election. I can understand those arguments. It's kind of after the military's taken an operation on a place. I understand that. But we're also talking about a place that speaks predominantly Russian, is predominantly Russian. So, and the real bummer about it that happened of course, Vladimir Putin said, the Moscow has a positive attitude toward any peace initiatives, but that Kyiv needs to show similar willingness. He said that a couple days ago. What happened this morning as of recording is that this sweet little article from Ukraine, Zelensky pushes back on U.S. peace plan. The Ukrainian president said his country would never recognize Russian control of Crimea, a key Russian demand.
So Zelensky says no.
Yeah, basically saying that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. He said at a press conference on Tuesday, there's nothing to talk about here. This is against our constitution. So he's using legalism.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So it seems like Zelensky's playing some pretty serious cards here. What happened to the conversation that was had in the Oval Office where Trump said, "You don't have the cards"?
Yeah, right. Well, and I think he doesn't. Like, at the end of the day, like, if they refuse to sign, America just says, "Well, we're out." You know, we're
good luck, Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, he just doesn't have a card to play. He can bluster like this, and he can try to reorganize to get Europe to do all the weapons and money that America's been giving. I don't think that's going to be enough. And so he's really gambling with the future of his country with that, in the sense of, like, yeah, you're not going to be able to get NATO membership. I didn't really hear any rumblings about them pushing back on that, although that was a thing a couple of weeks, like a month ago or whatever. But the Crimea thing is so interesting, right? Because it's like, this is not a thing. Like, I could see them having a lot of anxiety about former areas that have a nuclear power plant on them that provides power to Ukraine, and not getting that, right? I could see that. I could see them having, quibbles with the different land trades that might need to happen when it comes to the main body of Ukraine and things that have happened since 2020 or 2021. But Crimea? What is happening here? Like,
yeah, it seems like an interesting thing to bring back up from so far in the past. It seems, at least from my perspective, to have been very well, at least settled, and not at all a part of this particular conflict.
Right. Crimea has been part of the Russian Federation since like 1790. At the same time that we had Maine for the first time, like we acquired Maine, that little state up in the Northeast, they had Crimea. So imagine that for a minute. All right, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But we can't give up Crimea. We had it for, 50 years or something. It's like, well, I mean, it's complicated. And that's another reason why we shouldn't be involved. But the overarching thing is like, unless they want to lose a lot more, they need to come to the table. Because my understanding of the current battlefield arrangement, and I did listen to some Scott Ritter stuff on this earlier, so he's a little bit biased, so of course take it with a grain of salt, is that Russia still is making marginal gains and in pushing on Ukraine. So we'll see.
Yeah, so it sounds like time is on Russia's side and not on Ukraine's side, despite the fact that Zelensky seems to be playing hardball here when he probably really can't afford it.
Exactly, and it's almost like suicidal in a sense. It's quite strange. Yeah. But this is the thing, or like, he's made himself into the icon of, the Western liberal project. Like, they've spent so much time building him up. Maybe he's drinking his own Kool-Aid a little bit here and begin to believe that if I don't win by not repelling every Russian troop from every historical Ukrainian area, then, well, he loses out on his like identity. Right. I mean, like,
yeah,
and
almost sounds
money.
Like, and the cocaine money, you can't forget that, and the cars and the mansions, and
you're doing this.
It sounds to me like he might be part of the 4% that Jordan Peterson's talking about.
Yeah, a little narcissistic, a little. And I think when we covered the White House meeting where he was relatively unthankful and failed to wear a suit, that he kind of came across as exactly that type, unseeing of the way he's coming off, obviously.
For sure.
Yeah.
So how do you think it's going to play out?
Well, I think we'll see. But as far as it seems to me that as long as Russia and the U.S. can come to an arrangement, we're hitting the major notes here, like what to do with Crimea, which is like the easiest thing for the Americans to give because they have a naval base there. We can't take it without sending in the 82nd Airborne. And then and then obviously NATO membership is an easy thing for the Americans to give because we were never going to give it to Ukraine anyways. We threatened, we blustered, we do all this stuff in order to provoke Russia, but we never actually could. Why? Because they're too corrupt. They never qualified in the first place. That's the insane part of the whole frickin' thing, is that they tried to get in the past and we said no. The reason why is rejected by other NATO states. Why? Because there's a corruption problem in Ukraine. It has been forever. So what are we doing here? We're just doing this on the imagination fantasy land where they suddenly qualify and they don't.
So true. I mean, but I think obviously all of that bluster seemed to be, at least coming from the Biden administration, the point was to aggravate Russia, to try to get them to do something stupid, to escalate the war so that we could have some sort of just cause for escalating more on our side. And Russia didn't take the bait. So it doesn't seem likely that the Trump administration even ever had that on the table as an option.
Right. Well, and when Russia did take the bait, I mean, the Hawks first, they said, we got to defend democracy. We got to do all these things. And then by, 2 years in, they were saying, well, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of military industrial complex jobs are in America. And so we are benefited. This is a stimulus package to send all these weapons over there for America. And then they said, oh, did you understand? You don't get it. We're getting such a great deal here. We lose 0 lives and we degrade the Russian forces. Right. And if that to me is like, oh, you finally dipped your cards. You've played all your cards at that point. You're not telling us why you're really doing this. Because that's, I mean, I would guess is the true incentive to do all this provocation over these years is to degrade the Russian military force so that you can maintain global hegemony. Because that's the motive of all these neoliberals and neocons.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
Where it goes from here, we've gotten the easiest trades, going. Now we're going to get into the hard stuff, like what to do with certain areas. It seems like Donbass would be the next easiest, but beyond that, Luhansk and those kind of trade-offs, I'm not quite sure enough. I don't know enough to be able to say, but I do think that, these are good signs, should be celebrated. And obviously we should definitely be laughing at Zelensky as he beclowns himself.
Generally pretty easy to do these days.
Exactly. When he's not wearing the codpiece and dancing on stage, that whole thing.
Exactly.
You see those
playing
videos?
the piano with his genitalia.
Exactly. All right. So on another bright note, right? Because we're about the positivity. We're about giving out white pills. So we have another state went for universal school choice. North Dakota just passed universal school choice bill through its legislature. Hasn't been signed by the governor yet, but it looks like every sign is good that it will be signed. I read the bill. I've read quite a few school choice bills before. This is a very well structured one. I really like how it addresses concerns that are rising up from the bottom on the right when it comes to if you have government funding of education savings account, will that creep into regulating homeschools and private schools? This bill is absolutely completely clear that cannot happen. It would be illegal for that to happen. And so I think it was amended quite a few times, but the end result is a very clear bill on those terms. So a tremendously important win, and one of many dominoes that have fallen since COVID in advancing, universal school choice.
That's awesome. How many states does this make it now that have passed substantial school choice bills? Once Texas and North Dakota sign, we'll be at 16 states. So before we had like one state before COVID, now we have 16 in 5 years. Yeah. So COVID was such a huge catalyst for this movement to really take off. Mm-hmm. This is a great proof for my Taoist approach to political power, or Newtonian, if you like that better, if you don't like the philosophical part. When you push, there's a pushback. COVID pushed a lot of things, and it changed a lot of ways people thought about all kinds of things we talk about in this podcast all the time. But one of the things it revealed was that our educational systems are terrible, and that what we're teaching in schools are not worth learning, and that a lot of the school system is actually being kind of operated as like an indoctrination center for various different approaches to the way that they view the world. And lastly, that it was like this crazy, we're going to protect the teachers more than the children thing. And while I understand we need to protect teachers, especially if they're older, right? This is COVID and all that kind of stuff, especially in the early days. But when schools were closed down after month after month after month with no regard to the parents and their needs or the children and what they were missing out in terms of learning loss and all those kind of things, or making kids wear masks for a whole year after the pandemic when we knew that the threats to children were almost none. It just degraded the public stature of public schools to such a point where all of a sudden school choice and getting alternatives to people became a much more achievable political goal as a net consequence of that blowback against the initial push. Yeah. Well, and as we've mentioned many times before as well, it also opened parents' eyes, seeing their kids sitting at home on a laptop and getting to listen in on these lessons, what exactly they were being taught, and then perhaps brought to their attention, well, actually, I don't really agree with a lot of the things my kids are being taught, and I no longer want to support this model of education. And with that, I'm curious, does the North Dakota bill mean, does it set it up such that parents' tax dollars will follow their child wherever they want to send them to school? So that they're not also paying taxes at the public school and paying double to send them somewhere else?
Yeah, so it allocates their students' proportion of education funds into an education savings account once they opt out of their school, right? So these things get complicated because you have to craft the legislation to fit into the legislative code, the way the legislative code works and the way it separates things. So there's some interesting novelties here, and the role of like the North Dakota Bank and things like that, how it fits in there are completely unintuitive to me. But the function, what it does, it says, if you want to leave the public school system and go someplace else, you can do that. You always could do that. But now you can get an ESA, education savings account, which then takes tax dollars, fills that into that bucket, and then you can spend that where appropriate, right? Can't do anything with it. You can't go to Cabo with it, but you can go to a Montessori school and learn from a Montessori teacher in that educational method.
But what if my preferred Montessori school is in Cabo, David?
Well, you got to move to Cabo then. You can't do it on North Dakota's dime.
Perfectly fair.
Even the school filtered to Cabo. So there's accountabilities within the system, but the system is broadly set to accommodate a wide spectrum of learning approaches and things like that, including religious education, including the wide diversity of educational models that we now have access in the United States that I think are really important to fit all the different learning models that kids have, because not all kids learn the same. And the really encouraging thing here, and the magic of school choice is that it allows new entrepreneurs to enter the space that aren't otherwise there. Because this is always the challenge in rural states like North Dakota and like Montana, is that there isn't a wealth of options, right? Because you don't have as many wealthy people, right? Wealthy people start private schools. That's typically what it is. Not always, but that's often what it is. There are some grassroots funding of schools and grassroots creating of schools, especially in homeschools and homeschool cooperatives. But there's less of that. But when you have education choice, you now have changed the economics to make it work. And I want to tell a personal story about that. My son's school is closing down at the end of this year. He loves his school. Loves his school. He is an evangelist of the Acton method. And we don't have to get into the actual education methodology, but he loves it because he's like his old man. He's not the kind that wants to sit and be talked to. He wants to engage. He wants to teach himself. He wants to be able to go at his pace and his speed and accelerate the things that are most interesting to him, while having the accountability within the education system because he's 10. His school will close down at this year because the economic model is not viable. It's so difficult to charge something tuition that people can afford, so you can get the building and get all the stuff and do all the things. And we could barely afford it as it was, and they would need to charge more in order to be sustainable. Meanwhile, I'm paying tens of thousands of dollars in tuition and in property taxes. When between those two, we could have easily kept that school going with the amount of families that they had, but didn't have access to that. Not in my state. And so that entrepreneurship, pulled together by a former school principal and math teacher who discovered the Acton method, was passionate about it, and wanted to advance that for his kids and for other kids in the area where we live, is now just gone. It's gone. It's not going to be available. That's the only Acton school that was in town. So all those kids lose out. And for what? Because people are worried about teachers' unions not getting as big a cut of the deal. A real tragedy. And we had an education universal voucher, or not voucher, but program in the Montana legislature this year, and it was voted down.
I'm sure with a lot of resistance from the teachers' unions.
Yeah, in this case, the teachers' unions were fair, but they control the Democrats. The Democrats all voted against it. It was really rural Republicans and moderate Republicans who just, they're really just Democrats, honestly. Or I don't know. I can't really tell you why they voted against it, other than in the past when I've worked with that issue with some legislators, it's also like, well, my school in way out in rural Montana is fine, and I'm worried about them not getting as much money because they've bought into this story that school choice means less money for your rural school district. which is false, but there it is.
So it's really an education campaign that needs to take place to help legislators from rural areas understand that it's not a threat to their school if they like it.
Yeah, that's the tactical level, and then it's also just the political level, right? There has to be consequences for this, and that's the story in Texas. Texas, they passed education savings accounts in February, and now have a universal school choice program about to be signed by Governor Abbott. What did he do in the intervening years? Because it was brought up last session. Last session, they brought it up and was voted down. What did the governor do? He helped primary those people and spent money against them and said, these are bad Republicans. They defined what a good Republican is, and they held them to account for that. Well, unfortunately, Montana's governor has not done that, which is a real shame, because otherwise he supposedly supports school choice. But instead, he has largely stayed out or, not been friendly to the actual conservatives trying to advance that particular thing because he has other things on his agenda.
That's sad. The kids are losing out because of it.
Yes, it is. It is quite sad.
Yeah. Are there other states that are working on similar things this session?
Yeah, well, Tennessee and Wyoming also passed universal ESAs. I don't know about other states that might be in process for it, but those two have also passed. So, it's incredibly encouraging of the overall scope of it. I'm hoping to see the long term in our state, but in your state, wherever you're at and wherever you're listening to this, education savings accounts are one of the best things you can do to improve outcomes for your kids. In fact, there was a study that came out last year that said that it makes you 53% more likely to graduate college if you participate in an ESA program. It's 53%. Wow. That's enormous. So there's so many other, the data is so rich in this, because when school choice is implemented, you get a really great sample set of before and after, comparative against states. And then some states you even get randomized, like charter systems and all that. You actually get actual randomization, like true social science randomization out of the participants, and you can study the differences, and it really helps tease out the way that competition drives results. So it's a tremendous win, and hopefully we keep seeing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. When you don't see competition against public schools that currently exist, they're allowed to ossify. They don't have to innovate. They don't have to, apply any sort of compelling curriculums or anything else to keep people interested in their product, because you're basically required to pay for their product, which is just, it's a monopoly on education is what it is. So yes. I think kids and parents deserve better than that. And hopefully Governor Gianforte here in Montana gets his act together and does what Governor Abbott has done and puts the spotlight on those Republicans in name only, it sounds like, that voted this down. And hopefully the other states around us, as there's a critical mass of other states that pass it, it does kind of prove to maybe some of these legislators who are just hesitant for fear of their own education systems being impacted, that they see it's not such a bad deal and they can get on board with it.
100%. And I think having neighboring states is a big part of that. I agree. Go ahead.
Yeah. And especially North Dakota, because you're right. It's so similar in the fact that it's a very rural state, similar to Montana. So hopefully we see this continue to trend in the right direction.
Absolutely. And if you're from an urban state or a rural state like us, if you're flyover country, this is your podcast, because we get across all the issues. And if you want to join in the debate, join our Discord. We got people who listen to us on Spotify, people who are on the YouTube, people who follow us on socials only. They join the Discord so we can mix it up. We've had a lot of great discussion, and you can join that. Just check out the link below and jump into the Discord. It's a great time. And if you want to support this podcast, couple ways you can do it. Please, hit that like button real quick and easy. Second, maybe a little bit more. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe you really like this podcast. You're a school choice advocate. Leave a comment about your school choice experience. And even further than that, you can give us a review on Spotify. Do one of those things. And then lastly, you can always join as a member. We do have a membership group. We issue special videos just for you guys on the members only page. You get special access, early access, and then you get special videos sometimes just for the members that we try to provide, because we appreciate you guys so much and appreciate doing this project. We love talking to y'all. So please join in and help us out.
Absolutely. And, we're actually embarking on a very special project, and maybe this will, will get you fired up. We want to get David to Bosley Medical Center to get some new hair on his head. And we're raising funds for that right now. Every dollar of our memberships goes to getting David a fresh do. So if all the exclusive content doesn't sway you, then maybe our special charity project will.
Oh man,
I'm totally kidding. We're not doing that.
That'd be so weird. When I first shaved my head, I was like, I didn't recognize myself. Now I don't think I could recognize myself if I had hair again. That'd be so weird.
Well, when you lose the bingo for this year, you will get to wear a different wig every week for a month.
Oh yes.
And you can come up with whatever you want for me and Kyle. Whatever happens. If we lose, we'll settle it on the air.
Speaking of that, if you join the Discord, you can see our bingo, what we've been doing with that, our predictions for the year. We haven't checked in for a while, so we got to do that.
We haven't. I can say I believe I'm almost confirmed on a new win. I think it might have been tentatively marked for me, but it looks like RFK just came out today or perhaps yesterday saying that they are going to be banning food dyes, toxic food dyes, artificial petroleum-based products from food. So mark that one as a win for everyone who eats food and also for me and bingo.
Hell yeah. There you go.
All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you very much. And David, I'm excited to have you back in Bozeman more full time now that the legislative session is coming to an end. So we are all going to be back in the studio to bring you guys a lot more great content. We appreciate you for watching. For David Rand, I'm Joe Sheehan. We'll see you the next time. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com.